Welcome to this, the 157th episode of Old Romans Unscripted. And welcome to you, Father Gierke. How are you?
Doing well, Your Grace. How are you doing?
Not too bad, not too bad. Wonderful news that you're able to come to the Philippines.
Yes. So there was a bit of miscommunication, but it all got straightened out. I should have been informed much sooner. That would have saved a whole bunch of stress on my end. But nonetheless, now it's the 2-minute drill, if you will, of scrambling to make sure everything's ready to go, because I fly out in 15 days, something like that. So just under 2 weeks to get everything all squared away.
Yep. I've informed Bishop Joash in the Philippines, so they're all very excited, and everything's gradually seems to be coming together at that end. As usual, welcome to all of you. Please do greet each other, say hi to each other in the live chat. Once again, I'm afraid, a confession to make, we are pre-recording this. It's actually Friday, not Saturday for us. But this will, of course, air on Saturday as usual. But I'm in the midst of the pantomime run, and that's why, once again, this is being pre-recorded. So once more, if anything happens in the next 24 hours, news-wise, we're not going to cover it. So apologies for that. But hopefully, there's enough to be talking about anyway. So without further ado, I'm going to play a so-called debate about an issue that's going on over here in the UK, but of course is relevant across the Northern Hemisphere and Western politics. This is a debate concerning an issue in Scotland that, by extension, affects the Equalities Act in the other UK countries. And this is a discussion about that. So I'm going to play this, and then we can comment upon it. So hopefully this works. Let's see.
Podcast. Afternoon to you both. Here that you are quite happy here.
Yes, and not just our organisation, not just me. I think this is something that many women across Scotland, from all kinds of political backgrounds, supporters of independence, supporters of the Union, are really pleased about, because the Scottish government was warned they were
Why does it conflict with the Equalities Act?
Now, I should just interject at this point, just to say that, again, just to give a little more context. So, for those of you who perhaps are less familiar with British politics, we're called the United Kingdom, and we are made up of essentially 4 countries. That's England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. And we have what's called a devolved government. That is to say that each of those 4 areas have their own government, as well as an overall government and parliament based in London. So the Scottish government, the devolved Scottish government, they have passed a bill that will allow people as young as 16 years old to register and self-identify themselves as being of the opposite gender to their birth. And the law that the Scottish Parliament has passed means that a person who only has lived as the opposite gender for 3 months or 6 months can then apply to have all their legal records changed to reflect their new chosen self-identity. So in other words, their bank statements, their birth certificates, or anything legally associated with them, that can be changed. Now, of course, the issue with this, there are lots of issues with this, but the issue that the first speaker is commenting upon is the impact that this has elsewhere in the UK, because although we have devolved governments, otherwise our day-to-day lives, as it were, are shared. And there are certain laws that govern the whole UK. So the devolved parliaments can make up laws for their particular areas, but then there are national laws. And the question at point here is that the Equalities Act that covers the whole of the United Kingdom is now threatened by this new situation conceivably in Scotland. And so the UK government and the British Prime Minister have stepped in and are saying that they're refusing the Scottish Parliament to enforce this new law because of its effect on the UK, on the UK.
Well, what has been found in the recent judicial review that was that the DRC persons under the Equality Act. Now, what the Scottish government has moved any form of process for a protection body. There are no checks, there are no balances, there's no third-party authorization. They just have to self-declare that they have lived in an acquired gender, and there are no definitions for what living in an acquired gender are, for 3 months, and they will be granted a piece of paper. The Scottish government estimate that there will be a tenfold increase. And many people feel impact on offices and services because it becomes much harder to apply restrictions on who can and cannot access those places. I'm quite sure that supporters are saying that the exceptions in the Equality Act remain. A GRC also comes with Section 22, which gives people additional rights to privacy. It also makes tests for exclusion harder. It means that they are automatically counted in data. So things like the pay gap, things like the public sector equality duty that comes with purposes under that. And the simple of the matter is that there are only two sexes and people cannot change sex. And we are losing potentially the ability to count men and women as sex categories if we were to go down this path. And England and Wales obviously want to protect that.
Okay, all right. Let's put some of that, Frida, but let's start for afternoon to you, Frida, by the way. Thank you for being with us. Susan's point there that it kind of promotes the world as human beings and as women, end of story.
Well, that's a very authoritarian stance to start deciding what are men and what are women based on, I mean, you can't legislate for that. I don't have a GRC. I'm very welcome in women's spaces. The cis women I know welcome me into women's spaces because they know best.
No, I'm just going to pause. I'm just going to pause the video there for a minute, just to get Father Gierke's initial reaction.
It was kind of, I don't know if it was choppy on your end, but it was cutting in and out on mine. So I wasn't able to hear much of it. But I mean, I got the gist from reading the article and just, and the interesting thing I want to point out. So they're talking about gender, but then they're using the term sex. Two different things. Like they're already misusing terms to show they have no idea what they're actually doing. Like legally, like even, just take the legal aspect out of it, the rights aspect out of it. You need to know your terms, define your terms, and present your terms objectively if you want anything to be done. They're using, this is under gender identity and everything like that, but using the term sex, which scientifically, objectively, there are only two sex, male and female. That's it. Like, that's the chemistry. There's no getting around it. There's XY, XX chromosomes. Now, yes, there's variations, mutations of those chromosomes throughout evolution of the genetic form, but predominantly science has agreed universally for millennia there are two chromosomes, X and Y, XX and XY, together making up the sex. But they're talking about gender. Now, gender is a social norm. It really doesn't have much to do with science. This is a term that has been utilized, and realistically pretty recent. Like, gender wasn't really discussed prior to the modern era. There wasn't really this big push in gender identity that we see today. It was talking about the sex. And even if you look at like philosophy and theology, you look at the objective science of medicine, it was talking about sex. They weren't talking about genders. And now we see this gender discussion, but they don't have any science to back it up. So they have to use the scientific terms of sex, but now you're just, comparing apples and oranges, really. You can't make an orange an apple, nor can you make an apple an orange. And so to give them credit, to give any form of credit to this whole idea, this thesis, if you will, you need to have objective terms and stick with the definition of those terms in order to give any type of credibility or to have any sense of, discussion. I'm not going to sit here and discuss this with somebody when they don't even use terms properly, because what's the point? If you can't understand terms and be able to have a conversation using the terms, instead you're just going to interchange terms like they don't matter. That's a problem. You can't discuss something with somebody when you're not talking the same language.
Yeah, I think actually this is this is part of the crux of the debate, because you're quite right that the use of gender in this way is a modern phenomenon. And when we say a modern phenomenon, we mean very recent. It really only began with gender identity politics. The use of gender in this way really only began with identity politics, and itself is a rather late development within identity politics. I mean, you could argue that it goes back to the 60s, 70s, but it doesn't really. It's very much more of a 2000s phenomena than even in the 1990s. But the use or reference to gender, of course, has existed in linguistics for centuries. So it's less obvious to English speakers, but anyone who's studied a foreign language will know that words have gender, and the masculine words, feminine words. If you've studied French, if you studied Italian, studied Latin, etc., you'll be familiar with the use of gender as a term related to language. And of course, in that sense, it does refer to male and female. But otherwise, sex, as you rightly say, is the biological term. But the whole, this whole debate is is around this. In part, is around an attempt by progressives to change things by changing language or by changing the use of language, so that, for example, something we'll come on to talk about later, hopefully, the redefinition of marriage. Now, I remember attending a civil registry wedding just a few years ago, where framed on the wall was a citation that read, legal marriage in this country is between one man and one woman. Now, before we had same-sex marriage in the UK, we had same-sex unions. We had, they were called civil unions. And a distinction was made between civil union and civil marriage. In other words, a civil union was like marriage, but was not the same as marriage. And initially, everybody accepted that. And rather ironically, it was David Cameron as a Tory Prime Minister, who later introduced the idea of gay marriage. Nobody had asked for it. It was really a missed political step, because he was trying to hide the beginnings of the recession. He wanted a diversion, and so he introduced this. He introduced the same-sex marriage concept, where again, then we had all this debate about, well, what is the definition of marriage? Now, of course, legally now, here and elsewhere, they've redefined the term. So they've redefined marriage so that it is no longer legally simply between one man and one woman, but instead is now between two persons, whatever that means. And
wait, what's the definition now?
So is marriage is a union between two persons.
Hold on, marriage is between two persons? But didn't we just have somebody come out recently and like try to redefine personhood? Wasn't that a thing not too long ago?
Well,
I believe there was a bishop in Rome that might have said something about personhood.
Right. I mean, well, that was Francis, and that was something about pro-life issues.
But still, just keeping with terms. See, so now marriage is defined between two persons. So now we have to define what person is. And we already see within even the pro-life and pro-choice movement, the attack on that definition. But that has relevance to this, movement as well, because you can't say, well, the definition for personhood is this in this state, but it's changed for this state. And we're just obviously we're just going into mass confusion. And the old song, anything goes, really. But it's just it's not surprising, but it is alarming, because nonetheless, if we allow this to continue, if we allow this trajectory to maintain, we're just going to completely see the annihilation of nations. If we just give up on gender, sex, and persons, if we can redefine those words, those terms, and make them whatever we want to feel like. So long, human race. Goodbye, world. Goodbye, nations.
Well, ultimately, yeah. I mean, that.
And that will happen quickly. Like, this won't be, this is not going to be a over time thing. This will happen quickly. I mean, look at what happened with the Roman Empire. What was their demise? One of the strongest empires in the history of the human race. When they started giving them morality and became lax and became complicit and lazy and luxurious. They no longer had the military force. They no longer had the strong definition of their society crumbled within. That was, I mean, many things were demise of the Roman Empire, but that was, historians agree, that was the root cause of it, was their society became lax. They were giving in to pleasures rather than remaining virtuous and strong. So I think that's where we're heading. You know, if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat it, or history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure rhymes. Two notions to take away from that.
Yeah. Yeah. But how that's being achieved and how that's being levered politically is through an attack on the use of language.
Yeah, everybody thought it was going to be a nuclear bomb. No, this is what's going to happen. It's the attack on the family. It's attack on the humankind and the human race as a whole. They don't need to drop a nuclear bomb to destroy the world. They can do it this way. It's a lot easier. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah. Yeah. But not everybody understands that, which is why it's necessary for us to explain things.
Exactly. And that's what we're doing here.
And that's what we're doing here. So, you know, because a lot of people don't understand, don't appreciate that this is the tactic of the progressives, is to use this attack on language and to redefine how language is used and applied. So, as you say, you know, personhood, which is still not quite defined yet in any way that is, you know, sort of generally accepted from the progressive agenda, from that side of things. But at the moment, certainly, they have, you know, they've redefined marriage, and now they're redefining. Well, I suppose in a funny kind of way, they are redefining personhood, because this is the beginning of redefining personhood through identity. And this confusion of language, re-gender, and sex is, you know, one of the ways in which this is occurring. You know, basically, this is a misapplication of the notion of gender to describe identity or personhood. You know, it's strictly speaking, gender is, as a term and as a concept, is used within language itself. It's more of a linguistical phenomenon. They have redefined it. I was wondering where you were going earlier when you started talking about gender as being totally distinct from sex, because that's of course one of the arguments that the progressives are trying to make, is that gender has nothing to do with physical reality, that rather, as it is used conceptually in linguistics, so too is gender a conceptual phenomenon, rather than a reflection of reality. And yet, even linguistically, the use of gender is derived from observations many centuries ago of terms and their application, or the way in which words are used to imply a male or feminine, or masculine or feminine identity, or correspondence. So
yes,
you know,
I hopefully I wasn't misguiding anybody in that, because that's not.
I think you recovered.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure, because I was like, I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole with that.
You caught my attention, because of course that is how many progressives frame this argument, that there is a total difference between gender and
well,
sex.
you got to have that attention getter, right? You got to captivate somebody if you're going to talk with them. So hopefully it works.
But of course, the issue here now, what this discussion we've been watching, the point that the woman was making was, of course, that this redefinition actually loses the nature of what it means, once again, of what it means to be a woman, because if you start well, in other words, all of the kind of arguments that have been made since the 60s for women's spaces and women's rights and women's safety, all of these things suddenly become useless terms or useless concepts, because if you redefine what a woman is or who a woman is, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's what is a woman or who is a woman. From the gender bending perspective, it's about who, and for everybody else, it's about what. And the real fear here, and the real fear here is that by essentially redefining what a woman is by who claims to be one, actual women will begin to, their rights and their hard won for rights in some cases will begin to erode.
No, hold on. Are you talking about? Hang on. You could continue on. Sorry.
And part of the problem here is, for example, and of course you will know, you will appreciate this, but if somebody self-identifies man to a woman, and all their paperwork is changed, meaning their birth certificate, their clinical records, etc., that actually means that categories within politics of men and women become lost, and it means that these men, when they need medical attention or medical help, could be mistreated or misdiagnosed because, according to their records, they're a she.
Well, and I mean, even no matter what, medically or just society, and I've already come across this in my secular work, unfortunately. It's been an issue, and I kind of chuckled. It was a few weeks ago. I had to do a pregnancy test on a man. Now, for our viewers who may not know, pregnancy tests can only be done if you have an XY chromosome, if you're a biological woman. If you do a pregnancy test on a biological man, you're not going to get a result, so or a favorable result. So I had to do a pregnancy test. Now, I work primarily in a male correctional facility, so most of my patients are men biologically. And so when this order came across saying pregnancy test, I was like, wait, what? I have to do it right. And then you read the patient's chart, and then you see the infamous word of transgender. So biologically born a woman, and now it has legally been transitioned to a male. So for whatever reason, I don't get into the happenings of what my superiors and the sheriff and all those good people in charge with housing made. They were housed as a male, so they were with men in a male living area. But nonetheless, because they were biologically born a woman, and because the procedures that we have in place in the correctional facility and the medical side, we have to do a pregnancy test just to make sure, because that's an issue. So if someone's pregnant, in the correctional facilities, there's special treatments and care that is rendered to that inmate while they're being housed here. So we need to make sure that's accomplished. So I was very professional, very respecting of this person's, self-identity. And through my by the grace of God, I was definitely praying that I don't fumble words and explanations while I carry out this test. The person was very accepting, very, they felt comfortable. They were okay with everything, and I explained. And so we got the test accomplished, and everything was good. But it just shows that as a priest and as a Franciscan, as a human being, as someone in the medical field, we have to be compassionate. We have to be understanding to the person and help the person with what they need help with. It wasn't a time to judge. It wasn't a time to ridicule. It wasn't a time to berate. I did get a chuckle out of it, obviously not in front of the patient. I did have my moment of, is this what 2023 is going to be like? Because it was right early in the year, of course. So, but nonetheless, it's like, okay, yeah, this is what we have to deal with. And how do we help those who are struggling with this, who seem to be influenced by people who shouldn't be influencing them, who are leading them deeper into the trap rather than leading them out of the trap?
Yeah. Well, of course, and this is the problem that, in other correctional facilities and already here in the UK, we have issues where male inmates decide to reclassify themselves as women, self-identify as women, and then are put in women's jails. And then we end up with pregnant inmates because, when men and women are together, this kind of thing happens. But we also, sadly, aside from unexpected pregnancies, there are cases in our courts where men who identified themselves as women and entered women's prisons then abused other women.
And we also have it on the flip side too, where men identifying as women but are more feminine in that sense, but they don't have the classification to be put in a woman's facility. They're housed with men. And then we have the unfortunate case of either, well, it's by definition here in the United States, if you're in a correctional facility, you don't have consent for any type of thing sexual. So it's rape. And there's laws, there's cases, there's procedures and everything like that. So no matter what happens, even if it's two consenting persons, it's still classified if anything does take place. It's a rape case. So, but even then, so you have the sexual barriers taking place. People it's a mess. And the one thing I want to just touch base on, when you were talking about the who versus what aspect of things. Well, when you use what is for objectifying? It's defining an object. And if we use what, like what is a man, what is a woman, we're putting a emphasis on an object, not a person. And now, yes, there are times where that is needed, but when we're talking about this type of stuff, we're talking about gender and sex and identity. We need to use who and whom because they're a person. And if we objectify people, which we already see, the unfortunate case with, pornography and just the promiscuity of the sex, that we're facing as a culture, society, we objectify people and we use them as an object to get pleasure. And then we're done with them. Once the pleasure is done and the hormones are over, then we just, kick them to the curb. There's no love. There's no intimacy that builds on a connection. It's just, it's lust. And it's a terrible thing that far too many people struggle with nowadays. And it is a terrible, terrible habit that plagues many people, and it's difficult to overcome. And there's a lot of good centers and resources out there to help people overcome this, but we cannot objectify the human race anymore. We need to see our worth as humans, and we're created, and who is our creator, and the love that our creator has, God has for us, right? And I just wanted to point that out, that we see this objectifying of the human race, and artificial intelligence, right? And we're seeing all these movements, and the Great Reset from Davos and World Economic Forum and all that fun stuff. That's what they're doing. They're just trying to objectify us. We're numbers to them. We're not chromosomes. We're not biological. We're numbers made of O's and ones, zeros and ones, and the people that control the world, unfortunately, they just see every single human being as numbers, and it's computed. It's a computerized formula. It's science to them. And it's interesting, right? So they see us in a scientific way, but yet they're using non-scientific means to control us, and we're falling for it. Well, that's ironic, as Dolores Morissette would say.
Yeah. And of course, ultimately, there is no separation between who and what we are. And again, this is one of the things the progressives are trying to do, is to make that separation between physical, biological reality and self-identity. And yet, as we know, the church teaches and has always taught that though we are tripartite beings, so though we are body, mind, and spirit, nonetheless we are one person. So who we are is made up of all three parts to our makeup. And the problem with this situation is this, dividing the person up, and trying to suggest that actually who you are is only who you are in your mind, and that what you are bears no reflection on who that is. That's their contention, essentially. And this, of course, is why we're countering it, because we know, even souls are gendered. There's a difference between a female and a male, not just in body, but also in spirit. And
definitely in mind. Definitely, definitely in mind.
Yeah.
And no man can ever figure out what a woman is thinking at any point in time, ever. Never going to happen.
Well, and you see, and this is one of the reasons why, for myself, I always find it so bizarre when somebody, when a man, for example, claims to be a woman, because I fail to understand how he could possibly gain that perception, because it's not within the realms of his experience to know what it is to be a woman, to think like a woman, to experience the body, to experience the physical world as a woman, let alone the societal dimension. And of course, this is another thing, within this debate is, again, there's this kind of separation of the concept of society from physical reality. We see this in the attack on the family. We see this in the way that they're trying, again, using language and terms to tell us that there are many ways of being family. That a family is just a collection of persons. Well, it's not. Families are related by blood, related by physicality, related by being
the whole
connected.
It's the whole definition of what a family is. Familial, I mean, it's in the root word. And it, you know, the one thing, I just had this eureka moment. Now, this may be something, correct me if I'm wrong, Your Grace, and I know you have no problem with that. So the aesthetics, we're fighting against the aesthetics. So when a male wants to become a female, what do you see? Do you see the aesthetical change? You may even see some mannerism change. But it's all aesthetic. It's all on the outside. It's all covering the surface. And the same thing with the liturgy, right? You see this modernistic change of the liturgy, the aesthetical change of the liturgy. Then it ultimately, through the seeping down, what changes theology, or we would argue the theology was changed to alter the new liturgy. But you see people attending to traditional liturgy, and this isn't supposed to be I'm not trying to attack anybody here, but you see people that attend the traditional mass for the aesthetics only, and then you see, and you can see that. You can tell somebody who's just attends for the aesthetical reason. They don't really care about the theology, or they haven't been taught the theology, or they don't grasp that theology just yet. And you can see that, compared to somebody who understands why the mass is said the way it's said, offered the way it's offered, why the prayers are important, what to do during these type of prayers, the internal dialogue that one has when they're praying at the liturgy, when they're participating actively in the Latin Mass, that the Mass of the Ages, you can see that. And you don't need to know anything about anything, just to observe, and you would see those camps. And so it's interesting, and when you see the attack on the liturgy, and now the attack on gender, the attack on the family, that this constant attacking, and then to break the aesthetic of it, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to say there's more than just what's on the surface level, or even the subsurface. Just like the skin, right? And I apologize for the next few shows that we do, because I'm in the middle of my CEUs right now. So I'm rehashing everything I learned during medic school and EMT school and everything. So I'm going through all these courses. So all this stuff, all these terms are coming fresh in my mind again. But the subcutaneous, the cutaneous, and the layers of the skin and the human body break down. And then you get to the muscles, then you get to the tendons, you get to the veins, the arteries, the bone, everything's protected, right? So that's what we're fighting against. That's what we're trying to decipher, dissect, and analyze, because it's not just what you see on the surface. It's not even what you see. We got to get to the bone marrow. And that's, I think the key is getting to that bone marrow. What's in your bone marrow as a human being, and the bone marrow of the church, the bone marrow of society? Well, the bone marrow of the church is theology. And the theology is truth. And Jesus Christ said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And we have a precedent for what our bone marrow is in the structure of the church and the life of the church. The structure of the family, or the structure of society, is the family. The bone marrow of society is the family. And we see that, and we can analyze that. We have objective truth and precedent for that. And that's what we're trying to, I guess, elaborate on and explain and help people with, because if you don't know what your bone marrow is, you're never going to know who you are. And bone marrow doesn't change as much as people would like it to. Now, it may deteriorate over time. You can lose a finger, you can lose an arm, you can lose a leg, you can lose, have your pancreas removed or something like that. But it doesn't change who you are as a whole. And I think that's the biggest key to take away from this, is that we can't be entrapped by the aesthetics of these movements. We need to see the bone marrow of it, if you will.
Let's so hold all of those thoughts in mind, folks, and let's just hear a bit more, as it were, from the other side.
For the same misogyny, please her earlier. Do you think a man who is predatory would look at a woman? No, because men who are predatory and abuse her about that kind of thing. The thing is, for me, even if I did, it wouldn't make any identity. No government can rubber stamp my identity. I already self-ID as the person I am. All that a GRC would do was allow me to get married, die, to be honest, and it's probably going to be the latter. This point me topic, and they'll push it into the media as a fear story. And there are a lot of people on board with it, because there are a lot of, like Helen Joyce and Mayor Forstater, quite happy to let that happen, because they come from a very Puritan, authoritarian stance on what gender is. To me, they're like gender police, in a sort of absolutist way, what gender is. It doesn't matter, really.
I mean, what about the point that Susan was making there, that it could mean a huge increase in people suddenly deciding that, in this case, they are women? That was one of the points that Susan made.
Ian, nobody suddenly decides that they are women. When I was 5 years old, I was telling my mum, anybody if you are trans. The thing is with me, I came out when I was 17 years old. And due to social pressures, I went back and if I felt there was a climate of inclusion and that people were welcoming, I would have come out sooner. And I would hate for young people to feel themselves. And you're going to go down a medical pathway. Nobody's saying children are going to go and, you know, have any sort of... It's very difficult to legislate for that, but to trust that the parents of those children are on board with that.
Okay, so Susan, do you really believe that lots of boys are going to suddenly at 16, young men, if you want to call them that, are suddenly going to start self-identifying as women, almost out of nowhere? Why would, as Frida said, you know, if you are trans and you know that within you, a piece of paper is going to make no, you're not going to suddenly go, oh, right, now there's a piece of paper. It's going to happen, is it?
Well, yes, because it is happening. What we've seen is a 4% increase in young girls.
Susan, it isn't happening.
Excuse me, you're doing this again. You always do this. It's very male to try and talk over women.
So you're going to gender me now, are you, Susan? This shows who you are, Susan. I'm sorry. This is who you are. You are discriminatory.
As all social contagion, it's about typically turn to self-harm mechanisms, and unfortunately the social pressures of this, and then there are also, on the other side, there are also issues around loopholes. You know, abusive men will exploit loopholes. We've seen that if they are
the GRC wouldn't change that.
Like they are beyond the law. They're in the police or something, and there is currently a race announced that he is changing his name to a woman's name and he wants to be put in a woman's prison. Now, you know, maybe Frida does feel like you're a woman, but an authoritarian. I just believe in my sex is female, your sex is not, and we are different because of that. And you cannot expect.
But are you, Susan? Are you saying Frida can't live as a woman?
Sorry?
Whatever the biological backbody, you can choose to live as the opposite sex. We're not North Korea, right? You can choose to do that, and I'm assuming you don't have a problem with that, too.
They are even linked to how we have you know, how we devise crash test dummies and law and important. And this interferes with the UK. Now, we are still part of the UK. Section the Government of Scotland Act, voted for by the SNP. It has always been there because some issues of law are devolved.
On this, because Susan,
about high. I mean, I might be service. I wear a uniform. Is we know because of trans women, it's because of systemic misogyny.
It's because of sex. It's because of sex.
But I'm not denying sex. Susan, stop being belligerent. This is not. But I'm not denying sex. You know, you're saying I'm a woman. Well, if I am a woman or not, it's not for me to decide. You know, I don't go into rooms and go, I am a woman. People respect me. If I went into it, say if I was out one night and I went to a toilet and I went to the male toilets, how would you feel if he saw me? He was stood at a urinal. He'd feel very uncomfortable.
How do you think women feel when they see you? Because women recognise your sex. I'm very...
No, you don't. None of the women I know in my school agree with you.
Susan, can I just ask you on that point? Sorry to finish on this point, but are you saying you think Frida should be using the male loos and not the female loos?
Yeah, or
wouldn't that be a bit strange?
I don't think Frida or anybody actually, where nobody who is not female, those people should not be in female spaces. Do that.
No,
but I mean, Frida said even have done a medical transition route. I mean, what we're talking about is fully intact men coming into women's spaces, and for a lot of women, vulnerable women and minority women, Muslim women, they cannot be in those spaces.
All right, listen, I have to.
I had like a million Sister Michael moments during that. Now, I mean, for anybody who knows Sister Michael, anyways, so Susan is, for lack of better terms, defending on our side, correct? She's more conservative. And the other person, the other person was the one promoting the Reformation bill, because it was chopping in and out for me. I don't know what it was doing.
A man who said this woman.
So okay, just so we're clear on all that, because I should have asked in the beginning of all this, but I just wow. I mean, what do you want to? However you want to go with this, Your Grace.
You know, this is the craziness, in which we're all now experiencing. And I remember, I mean, I'm sure you remember, 3 or 4 years ago, when all this seemed to begin to become a thing. One of the things that everyone was assured was, the idea that women would be unsafe in women's spaces was ridiculous, and so on and so forth. And yet, anecdotally, we have evidence, since of all sorts of cases where women have been attacked by cases.
So going back to the beginning of this whole ordeal, are you there, Your Grace?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sorry. You kind of cut out a little bit. The bill stated that this was for 16-year-olds that could make this determination.
Well, it's allowing. Yeah, it's saying people as
young as 16.
Young as 16.
So the minimum age to make this determination is 16 years old. Yeah. So I want our viewers to maybe think back if they can remember being 16. I know for myself it's a little bit sooner than maybe some of our viewers. And I can remember being 16. And, you know, yeah, I'm just starting to learn how to drive and getting my driver's license. That's about the most responsibility I have, is being able to drive. And when it comes to all these other like life events, I'm not ready to make anything like it. It's like, you know, dating, let alone, was scary enough at 16, and worrying about all this other stuff. It's like, come on, like, see, you don't know what you're doing. Most 20-year-olds don't even know what the heck they're doing with their life, and that's a shame, because you should have your life together fairly soon after high school, if you're well formed. But that's a whole nother subject. I see, and it's the attack on children, and that's the thing people don't understand. So it's 16 now, but you see these drag queen kids and these, you know, 14, 12, 10, 9, 8-year-olds being paraded around, given a platform, and it's child abuse. Call it what it is. It's child abuse, because, you know, growing up as a kid, whatever happened to just going out and playing? No, you know, just being a kid. Like, I'm so grateful that my parents said, don't worry about things. Just go out and play. Be a kid. Go play sports. Go play with your friends. Don't worry. And, you know, the stresses of adult life will come, and there will be plenty of them. Don't worry about it. And now, and I get that now. But just be a kid. Go out, play. Use your imagination. You know, don't. And it's lost. It's the attack on children. That kids can't be kids anymore. We need to have them identify as whatever. They need to be entertained by computers and internet and social media and all this stuff. Parents don't want to raise their kids anymore. They'll let the internet do it. Well, this is the result. This is the result when parents aren't parents anymore. And when parents haven't been formed on how to be parents anymore. And this goes back to what? The attack on family. This is how they do it. They slowly chip away at things. They whittle away, you know, because if you throw a whole log in a fire, it's not going to burn right away. So what do? You cut it up. You take an axe, you chop it up into pieces, and it burns quicker. And then when the fire gets hot enough, then you can throw a little bit bigger log on there and burn. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this roaring fire just consuming families, societies, nations. You know, it's just like, good Lord. Well, sorry.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, here
I'm sitting next to my fireplace right now, so that's why there's a fire analogy.
Here in the UK, we've children at primary school, so, you know, as young as 5, are being introduced to alternative concepts of family and relationships, etc. You know, kids in the States are being subjected to drag queen story hour and you know, all that kind of thing. We've got you know, teachers imposing alternative pronouns in their classrooms. It's a mess, and they are deliberately attacking. I mean, they wouldn't call it a thing, but they are deliberately attacking families and particularly children,
because it has no way to reproduce. This movement can't reproduce on its own, so you have to attack the kids.
Yeah. Okay. Next topic.
Yeah, we need to move on.
Let me see if, again, see if again if this will work.
Church is wrong, and Reverend Dr. Jamie. Jamie, you go first. Take the right decision. Yes.
People in the church obviously concentrate on faithfulness to God and his purposes for marriage and human sexuality, and continue to uphold the scriptural teaching which comes to us ultimately from Jesus Christ himself.
Okay.
Well, firstly, what Jeremy's being very disingenuous. He knows that we disagree about the interpretation of Scripture. As a Christian, I too agree that Scripture is absolutely foundational, but I believe that God calls me to love and to be loved and to accept who I am. And the problem we have right now is that embedding discrimination, which is what the bishops are continuing to do, causes significant help around the world, but particularly young LGBT people who are told that there's some class that is wrong, is sinful, should be celibate for life. And we know that God is individually, and it's about time we learnt to accept difference, embrace it, and celebrate it.
Jamie, Jane's saying it's unkind, this.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's clear that I'm being disingenuous. I'm stating by Christians for 2,000 years, by the vast majority of Christians who have ever lived, in fact. And I can quote to Jane the words of Jesus Christ himself, where he references the book of Genesis chapter 1, what God man put son himself. You know, marriage is instituted by God. It was affirmed by Jesus Christ. So there's nothing disingenuous about this decision. The Orthodox teaching marriage, and I don't think it's untoward to say this. Ultimately, God instituted marriage for the well-being of individuals to flourish when they follow what God says is right. So I don't consider this to be unkind.
Is it wish to be married?
Yes, you've heard from Jeremy there, a teaching that is absolutely impervious to any other point of view, to reason, to science, or indeed other alternative views of Scripture. Jesus said nothing about homosexuality. He talked about there being an individual rather than poly. Relationship is doing is like bishops, refusing to take on board the evidence from the mental health professions, the UN, the UK government, and the testimonies now of thousands of LGBT people, some of whom have taken their lives because of this really, I would say, unchristian and evil teaching. We thought the world was flat for thousands of years. We thought that.
Can I come back here?
You can, but just let me clarify. I'm Jeremy and you're Jamie. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say for a start, my name's not Jeremy, it's Jamie. And there are some accusations there's some clearly scandalous accusations, apart from the historical inaccuracy of saying that Christians have taught that the world is flat, which is just totally false. The other thing that Jane said is that Jesus never mentioned anything to do with homosexuality. That's because homosexuality as a concept didn't exist until the modern period. Jesus talks over and over again about which in the Greek sexual relationships outside of marriage. So this is just fundamentally untrue. Not to mention the fact that the New Testament mentions in at least 3 places, in Romans chapter 1, in 1 Corinthians 6 and 1 Timothy 1, specific about sex. The other thing I want to say is this thing that Jane is doing, where she's suggesting that my view leads people to commit suicide, is actually not true. I was reading an article on the livingout.org website written by my friend Andrew Bunt in 2017, which questions the empirical basis for this claim. Although high rates of suicide among gay people in general, although that's true, hang on 1 second, there are no significant differences. There are no significant differences between mainline Protestant.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there because I
mean, we're already getting close on time.
The essence of the has been made. So this is for the benefit of context, which I should have introduced it with that, but for the benefit of context, this is the Church of England, the Anglican Church in the UK, which their House of Bishops this week have been deliberating a 6-year internal church discussion and a report called Living in Love and Faith, which was, basically asking the bishops to give an opinion on same-sex marriages. And the bishops met this week, and they've said that they can't change church teaching. So in other words, they're not going to redefine marriage, but as a SOP to the LGBT community, they are going to issue authorized prayers of thanksgiving and blessing for same-gender marriages. And this, of course, has not... all this has done has poured oil onto the fire, because it doesn't satisfy anybody. Those who are more conservative in the Church of England say, well, now you're saying that it's okay to bless sin, and the progressives in the Church of England are saying, well, this inequality, and we wanted marriage, and this isn't marriage.
I mean,
there are various
this is ridiculous.
things, of course, that I wanted that. It's as usual an Anglican fudge.
Right, because I mean, this is the same church that ordains women to sacred ministers, but they can't change church teaching. This is the same church that got its conception from divorce, the changing on church teaching, but now on this one issue, they can't change church teaching. It's utter nonsense. I mean, why? I mean, and of course, the Church of England is different than the Episcopalian Church that people may know here in the United States. Even though I believe they're cousins or whatever, they're actually different. They're connected, but they're different jurisdictions, and they don't. So, like the craziness that you see in the Episcopal Church today, or the Anglo-Catholics and stuff like that, our viewers here in the United States are used to as Anglican, or affiliated with the Church of England. It's not the same jurisdiction. So, your Grace is more privy to all this, and you're actually the one that told me this when I asked you about this earlier. So there's different jurisdictions, bishop councils and stuff like that. So that's why when I was surprised about this, I was like, wait, didn't they already make this rule? Because they're already doing it here in the States. But this is the Church of England in the Diocese of England, the United Kingdom, not necessarily the counterparts across the pond. So, but yeah, nonetheless, I mean, wow.
Yeah, and of course, what's striking in what the proponent for change was saying, the complete misunderstanding, her complete misunderstanding of the notion of love within the Christian context. She has a very naive understanding of the nature of God as love. But also, of course, a very naive understanding of what love itself is within the context of holy matrimony, within the context of the Christian sacrament of marriage. And this, of course, you know, and this is part of the problem with this kind of debate in the public sphere, is that of uneducated people in theology who transpose worldly values and concepts onto their experience of Christianity. You know, and that's largely where these progressives come from. There are, of course, progressive theologians who are even more dangerous because they have a completely heretical notion of theology that they use to try and back up these sorts of innovate. But yeah.
And I was gonna interject on that.
Yeah.
That, you know, the worst people in these categories are those who have the office of the church that promote this progressiveness and that try to, you know, change church doctrine and support this type of movement. Now, I'm not attacking those who are pastoral to try to help those, but who try to support this movement and, you know, push these changes in the church. And there's far too many of them, and there's far too many people that were poorly catechized that just don't know anything about the faith and don't know and experience the love. And as you mentioned, you know, just when you try to come from the experience of what love is and who love is and how to love, if you've never been told, you know, the message of Jesus Christ in the true form and the true essence of what love is, of course you're going to get caught up in all these catchphrases and these whims and to just complete and utter nonsense, because you don't know what love is. You don't have a root to fall back on, which is sad, because, you know, my heart goes out for that person who seems so wounded and has never been able to have any type of healing to those wounds. They've, instead of giving medicine, they were given poison, and those wounds are only festering, and you see it lashing out. You see that hurt just crying out for comfort, for love, for acceptance.
Well, and this is the problem, you know, across the board. Really, the whole LGBT thing is, you know, and this failure to recognize or to accept that actually true wholeness and true healing only comes from accepting the truth as divinely revealed in Scripture and by the Word Himself incarnate, made flesh, and the apostolic teaching that the apostles themselves received from Christ in His presence, and which, you know, Orthodoxy has tried to perpetuate for the past 2,000 years. When you refuse to accept that, you're actually rejecting Christ. You're rejecting the gospel, and the last thing you are is a Christian.
And, you know, that's not to say that you're rejecting Christ if you're struggling with things. You know, if you fall into sin, it doesn't mean you're damned at, well, you got to go to confession, but I mean, when you're struggling and if you slip and fall, we're not talking about those type of people. We're not trying to chastise and condemn those type of people who are sincerely, generally struggling or have been misguided, you know.
Yeah. I mean, all of us are continually in a process of conversion. You know, all of us.
There was a. Sorry, you're cutting out a little bit. I don't know if there's a lag, so I don't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
Right. You know, the Christian life is an ongoing process of conversion, but you have to be open to that process. And this is where most people misunderstand what Christianity is really about, or what living the Christian life is about. It's, you know, it's not about conforming to a sense or idea of oneself. It's about conforming to the mirror image of God, and, you know, conforming your life and the way you appreciate and live and see things to God's perspective and to God's will. So, you know, when people say, you know, well, you know, people are born gay, they can't help it. Absolutely fine. God doesn't condemn that. No one's condemning them for that. However, God has divinely revealed his will in the scriptures for the way in which human beings should conduct themselves in terms of intimate relationships, which is, you know, intimate. That kind of intimacy is reserved for marriage and specifically for the procreation of children. All Christians then should live up to that value system that God has revealed, irrespective of anything. So irrespective of whatever condition, irrespective of however you have been made, if you want to follow Jesus, if you want to take the narrow path, that means living by God's desired pattern for our existence. And, you know, for sure, all of us, you know, will fall by the wayside now and again. We all, you know, will give in to temptations. We all sin. But as St. Paul reminds us, you know, our goal, our eyes, our hearts should be fixed on heaven. And we should be striving to attain that prize, even and despite our faults and our failings. And of course, which is why Christ instituted the sacraments, why he gave the apostles the power to absolve sins, so that we can start again, we can begin again each time, we can pick ourselves up, and by God's grace, we can be healed, we can be restored, we can be forgiven, we can begin afresh on the way to realizing eternal life with him. And, you know, that is the Christian life. But those who reject that ultimately condemn themselves. And, you know, there's you often hear people say, oh, well, like, you know, we've heard there that the woman in the clip just then was saying, you know, well, that's a very authoritarian interpretation that doesn't allow for, you know, any alternative perspective. Well, yeah, that's right, because this is what God has divinely revealed. If you don't accept scripture, if you don't accept the apostolic teaching, then you haven't got Christianity, and whatever version, cut and paste version that you're using is not the gospel, and it will not save you.
And, you know, just to piggyback a little bit on that, you know, one of the few points, actually maybe the only point she was right on saying is, for those poor souls who committed suicide over this, because they had somebody in a Christian type setting, authoritative type setting, pretty much damn them to hell and say, you know, you're possessed, you're a demon inside, you know. And there are Christians out there, there are fundamental crazy nut jobs out there, whatever type of religious camp. Those souls, those leaders, those people, people in power that are saying that stuff, that are driving these poor souls to do that sin, to commit the sin of suicide, that's on them. And our Lord had very strong words for those people who abuse their authority and who trouble a soul, who abuse a soul. So don't think they're going to get away with that. And that's not the right answer. That's not the right way one should be acting in authority with the so-called name of Christian. If you're a true Christian, you're going to be Catholic first and foremost. And if you're going to be a true Catholic, you're going to be more traditional. This is where you have conservative values. And if you're truly living out the Catholic life, you're going to have love, you're going to have empathy, you're going to have compassion, you're going to have joy, you're going to have the beatitude, right? The fruits and the gifts of the Holy Ghost. We tap into those resources, not just for ourselves, but to help others. And it's just, you pray for those souls. We should be praying for those poor souls who committed suicide, because part of my heart, part of my, I don't believe necessarily that suicide is a damnable sin. There's a lot of psychology and medical research into the state of one's mind during those times. And only God can judge. And those are the souls that we need to leave and plead to God's mercy for, that he will embrace them as a prodigal child. We can't just leave those souls to question. So I encourage our viewers, offer up a rosary, pray what you can for these poor souls that are troubled, the ones that have taken their lives, unfortunately, the ones that are going through these confusing times. But we need to pray, and we need to be there for them and show them there's more to love and how to love than what the world wants. Because the world's concept of love is not God's concept of love. That's my 2 cents.
Absolutely. Right. Well, I think we've whittled on long enough.
It's always difficult because these are not, cookie cutting, headlines. These aren't like our regular tabloids that we're used to. I mean, this is serious stuff. This is like, it's hard to give justice to these two subject matters in, hour and a half, or even 2 hours. These are, so I encourage anybody who, wants to know more about this or has any good questions, reach out to us, please. Reach out, comment, question, email us, get in touch. If you need to know more, if you're struggling or somebody who's struggling who could benefit from all this, please don't hesitate to reach out. That's what we're here for. Salvation of souls, helping to share the love of God. So please.
Cool.
Right. Well, pray a blessing then, Your Grace.
Yep, sure. Yeah. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Sit nomen Domini benedictum.
Et hoc nunc in usque et saeculorum.
Adiutorium nostrum in nomine Domini.
Qui fecit caelum et terra.
Benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti descendet super vos et mania et semper.
Amen.
Amen. Yes, hopefully are we both here next week?
I'll be in Michigan, so weather permitting and cell reception, I should be on.
Yeah. Excellent. Bishop Nicholas hopefully will be with us next week.
He'll be on Saturday next week, correct?
But next week will be Saturday, as usual. That's no change for you, the viewer. That's just that's for us. Okay. Well, as always, as Father Thomas says, any questions or anything, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Thank you to those of you who heard our plea last week on donations. For those of you who perhaps haven't yet, we do appreciate every penny sent our way that enables us to continue to produce these and other programs. If you're not already, please consider becoming a patron. For just a few shekels a month, you can be a regular sponsor that helps us, as Father Thomas said last week, to plan and budget ahead. Otherwise, any donation of any kind is more than welcome. We thank you all, and indeed this series only continues because of the generosity of a few. So please do consider giving what you can. Meanwhile, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.